Hello, welcome to the Assessment, Inventory, and Monitoring AIM Data Use webinar series. In the course of this series, we have been exploring the use of AIM data at various scales of use. We have some notes for our new listeners. This series is on Teams Live. Teams Live doesn't have a feature for audience voice participation, so for better or for worse, you are all automatically muted. If you have questions, please type them into the chat box. And depending on the question, we'll answer it during the presentation or at the end in the form of a chat. Please note that the default feature for your question will be anonymous unless you enter your name. We also need to publish your question before the group can see it, so don't panic if you don't see it right away. You can upvote other questions if you want to push them up the queue. It does appear that viewing the presentation in the Teams desktop app will give you the best viewing experience, so if that's possible for you, go ahead and do that. The presentation is being recorded and will be made available on the AIM SharePoint for BLM users. And check out the SharePoint to find the links for upcoming presentations in the series and to find the recordings. Thank you for joining us, and David Pilliod and Michelle Jeffries will be presenting Integrating AIM into the Land Treatment Exploration tool for us today. Take it away, David.
Okay, let's see if I can pull this off. Tell me if you see my screen.
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here and learn a little bit more about the Land Treatment Digital Library and our newest feature, the Land Treatment Exploration Tool. I'll be presenting today with Michelle Jeffries. I'm going to start by giving a little background about the LTDL and the exploration tool, and then Michelle will do a live demo. And so that's our plan for the next 20 minutes or so. We'll have questions at the end. So we're going to talk about this in the context of AIM because this is the AIM working group, but you can think about adaptive management in a cycle from planning to implementation of some management action, then following up and monitoring that action, and then ultimately archiving that information. And if that archive is done well, it's available then for the next planning cycle. And part of the keys to success of this adaptive management loop is obviously the documentation and archive part of that. If we're not doing a good job of documenting what we do and where, and then archiving that information, making it accessible so that that information then can be communicated, we're really breaking the adaptive management loop. And so we'll be talking about two parts of this cycle, the archive part, which is Land Treatment Digital Library, and then the new part, the planning part, this Land Treatment Exploration tool. To start, I want to give a little background about what is the Land Treatment Digital Library. It's a truly co-produced product that came from USGS and BLM, communicating a need to have better information about land treatments accessible and organized, because there were frequent data calls and there was a lot of repetition in these data calls, and it was a burden on field offices to be constantly compiling this information. So we thought, let's just do it once and for all and then make it available for both planning and as well as other purposes like scientific activities. How was the LTDL produced? Well, it's a huge amount of paper and digital information, and that information had to be collected. So we went to field offices and then transcribed that information into a database. And it's a geospatial database that is queryable and user-friendly, and we wanted it to be powerful enough that it could be used for multiple purposes. What types of land treatments are we talking about in the LTDL? Well, we focused on manipulations of vegetation and soil, and these are only on lands administered by the BLM because this is a BLM USGS project. But ultimately, it could have applications for other federal agencies or state agencies as well. And pretty much you can think about the land treatments as things like prescribed fire and herbicide spraying and any activity that could influence soil or vegetation, like mechanical removal of vegetation. Cattle grazing always comes up as a question, is that included? And we do include some livestock grazing and some livestock grazing exclosure information if it pertains to a specific purpose, such as controlling weeds or resting a pasture after a wildfire. How much information is available in the Land Treatment Digital Library? Well, since the Taylor Grazing Act of 1934, there's now about 20 million acres of land that have been treated on lands administered by the BLM. And so we have records of those in the orange bars as counts of treatments in any given year. And you can see that it increases precipitously and then kind of bounces around. The more recent year seems to come back down, and that's partly because we're just continually adding more and more treatments. And so this is a labor of love, a continuous process of keeping the information current for people to use. We have about 50,000 land treatments in the Land Treatment Digital Library, and this table on the left shows you the treatments by state in counts. And you can see the highest counts is in Oregon, and then the lowest are in some of these peripheral states that like Texas and North Dakota, where there just isn't a lot of BLM lands, and so there's not a lot of land treatments. And this map on the right shows polygons of the areas that have been treated. You could zoom in onto a specific state like Idaho, for example, and say, okay, of those 8,200 or so treatments in that state, how are they partitioned out into different activities? Things like seeding makes the bulk majority for one single group, but then you have herbicide, chemical spraying, prescribed fire, closures, exclosures, vegetation manipulations, facilities, fences, and so forth. And all of these categories are defined by the BLM. And so these are not groups that we came up with, but ones that fit and aligned with existing data sets. We also house as much information as we can when there are seeding activities on the ground to document what was seeded, where was it seeded, in terms of acres seeded, and so forth. And so this information then can be extracted for a specific area and used for both planning purposes as also documentation of what was done where. The information is being used. We respond to data calls all the time. As of 2009, or since 2009, we've responded to 132 different data calls. So that takes the burden off of field offices. And we also do data calls for other agencies like the Department of Agriculture, Forest Service, USGS, some state agencies and universities. The research has also been a key part of this Land Treatment Digital Library project, which ultimately is aided in resource management. There's been over 28 publications now in journals, several dissertation theses, and government reports. So how does AIM fit into this adaptive management loop? Well, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the term monitor, AIM, or modified AIM. And so the idea here is to show how some of these existing programs like AIM fit into this and how it might feed into things like the Land Treatment Digital Library and the Exploration Tool. And Michelle's going to highlight some of that as she talks about a specific treatment as an example where AIM points might be used to help understand what it looked like prior to a fire, and then how it might be used to try to understand reference conditions. So the Land Treatment Exploration Tool is a tool that was requested by resource managers and is provided for resource management. Ultimately, it identifies characteristics of planned treatment sites. It identifies past treatments that share similar characteristics. It can be used to create maps, summaries, and reports for planning purposes. But really what we're hoping is it facilitates communication and integration of data across administrative boundaries. And this facilitation of communication is so important for adaptive management. And this is one of our areas that we're really trying to promote. Officially, it was released this last month in May 2020 and is being implemented in several field offices as we speak. So I'm going to stop there and let Michelle take over. And at the end of the presentation or demonstration that Michelle provides, we'll take questions.
Okay, is my screen showing now? Great. Okay, so I'm going to use an example wildfire called Long Valley Fire. So I just pulled up the INSEE web real quick to just give a brief, oh, this one was in 2019 actually, apologies. So I'm going to be using a different Long Valley wildfire, but I'll pull it up here. So the idea of the land treatment exploration tool, as David was mentioning, was to tap into the knowledge that is held in the data of the LTDL and to bring it forward for you to use planning future treatments. So we're going to use a wildfire as an example of a restoration scenario where you'll be planning treatments. So there are 6 easy steps in the exploration tool. And the first step is where you define your treatment. So you give it a name and you give it the treatments within it. And so the name for our wildfire is Long Valley Wildfire, and it occurred in 2017. We have a drop-down list of treatment types you can select from. So if you're just planning a drill seeding or something like that, you can select your single treatment. But because we have a wildfire, we're going to have a complex overlay of different types of treatments. So if I select this option here, it's going to pull up a multi-select list of the treatment types provided from the Emergency Stabilization and Rehabilitation Program. So for this wildfire, we're going to say we're planning an aerial seeding, a drill seeding, an herbicide treatment, and a closure. And then the last part of step 1 is just where you register your file name. So the exploration tool has a lot of exportable products, so you can create single maps or you can export single tables, things like that. And the end result of the tool is this consistent report structure, and it'll have this file name to keep your file organization consistent. So then we can move on to the next step here. And this is where we actually define our project area. So you can either digitize on screen with the different tools we have here, or you can upload a zipped shapefile. For this example, I'm just going to upload our wildfire boundary. I got this wildfire boundary from GeoMac. So if you click on that button, a window will open, and these are just some of the example fires I use. I'll pull in the Long Valley Wildfire, and it will add it to our map and it'll zoom right to it. So if for any reason you need to modify a boundary, you can always click on your shape and the vertices will appear. This has a lot of vertices because this was uploaded. But if you were drawing an area, for example, you can update your vertices after you draw them, of course. So you can export your shapefile. If you do any modifications or if you digitize it yourself, you can export it as a shapefile, GeoJSON, or a KML. After you've defined your project boundary, you'll move on to the next step. And this step merely directs you to view some spatial characteristics of your planned treatment area. So this isn't going to calculate anything just yet, but it's going to show you visually some of the characteristics. So the first place it directs you to is the Site History tab. So if I click on this link, it'll toggle my view to this Site History tab here at the top. And so if I click that, it just toggles me over. And the first part of this is going to show you treatment history. So you can see our wildfire that has burned. It has been previously treated by the BLM because we're seeing some shapes appear. So this map on the left is showing you the frequency of land treatment polygons, and on the right it is showing you the type of land treatment polygons from the land treatment digital library. As you scroll down, there's a little annotation box where you can write notes about those overlaying treatments, and these notes are going to be included in the standardized report that is exported at the end. And so you can write, you know, as little or as much as you'd like here about what you're seeing in these maps. Just below this is also a table of those treatments that are directly overlapping with your project. And so what this is saying is that 20% or 27% of this current wildfire boundary has this overlay of this treatment type, facilities, fences, roads. And there's 20% of the area was seeded by this fish wildfire here. As you keep scrolling down, there's the wildfire history. So this is showing you, similar to the LTDL polygons, the frequency of wildfires that have happened in this area. And you can toggle this as well to show you the first year burned or the most recent year burned, so you get an idea of when those wildfires might have happened. If you scroll down a little further, there's another annotation box where, again, you can write some notes specifically about the wildfire history of your project area. The last part of the site history page shows you the 30-year climate average. So this is taken from PRISM, and you can see there's monthly temperature and precipitation values. And if you hover over these bars and lines, it'll give you that value. The next step of, or next part of step 3 directs you to the Fish and Wildlife Information for Planning and Consultation tab. So we are aware that there's a lot of tools out there in the world, and we're not going to recreate the wheel. And so we've just directly integrated this Fish and Wildlife tool right into the flow of the exploration tool. So it loads your perimeter right into IPAC, and then it'll show you the endangered species, migratory birds, facilities, and wetlands that overlap with your project area. And so you can scroll down here and see here are the endangered species that might occur in our project area. The last step of the exploration tool directs you to the planning map. And so the planning map tab is here, and it's kind of where we started, but it's also going to toggle you to the layers legend tab up here. So if I click that, it'll take me here, and this is just going to show you all of the layers that we have available for you to view and to think about for your plan treatment area. So this is an aim call. So for example, we have the aim points here, and we can see that there are a lot of aim points in and around this wildfire. So we could get an idea of some vegetation conditions outside and inside our burned area. And some of these were actually put in, I think, for this wildfire, but some of them happened perhaps before. And so this is kind of a step in the direction we want to go for starting to integrate AIM and pulling out some of that pre-fire vegetation or unburned nearby vegetation aspects. But we have over 60 different layers over here that you can turn on and view. And so you'll notice in the land treatment section, we have our LTDL polygons, but we also have other land treatment polygons that we know that exist. So like Forest Service polygons, a few state-specific layers that are across different agencies, like even some private land boundaries and things like that. But there are a lot of different layers in here, and we've been working with the ESR program recently, and they even came up with a priority landscape raster that we were able to integrate for them, and it's only viewable by the BLM, and it helps them determine where the priority landscapes are to treat. Once you're satisfied with just kind of visually getting familiar with your area, you can move on to the next step. And this is where you start to get some actual statistics. So a subset of those layers, we have created Geoprocessing Services to actually calculate statistics of the layer overlaying with your plan treatment area. By default, we have some of them selected to always output. And because I selected a wildfire project, there are many defaulted boxes. For this example, I'm just going to select all of them so that we get all of the outputs for this. You just click Add to Report, and it's going to toggle you over to the Report tab, and it gives a little kind of welcome summary message. And so now we're on this Report tab, and if I scroll down a little bit, you'll see these tables are blank right now, but they're going to start filling in with data as they're returned from the server. And so you can see them starting to populate here. So we can see that 55% of our area, which is about 46,000 acres, have moderate sage grouse breeding habitat. You can also see that most of this project area has low resistance resilience. And so you can start to get a pretty good idea of your project area from getting all these statistics. You can also view a map of the data by simply clicking this, and it'll just turn on that layer for you. So you get a lot of information with very little effort. As I scroll down here to the bottom, there's an area, again, to write some more annotation notes. So there are a lot of tables to think about, and you can start writing notes to yourself that will be included in the report under here. The next step of the exploration tool allows you to tap into the LTDL treatments. And so this is where we're actually going to start searching for legacy data. And how we do that first is by selecting a bounding distance. So we have over 50,000 treatments in the LTDL, and that's far and away too much information for a single resource manager to try and think about. And so we first filter that down by some area. And so you can only show results from your field office, district office, state, so on and so forth. For this example, I'm just going to do a buffer distance, and we will do 20 miles, and it'll adjust my buffer. And then there's also these optional similarity indices. So what that will do is it'll compare every returned LTDL polygon to your project area by climate, heat load, and landform. And it does that with a Bray-Curtis dissimilarity index. And so I'm going to select those and let that query run. And so it'll take a few minutes, and there's this little area down here where the query will tell you where it is in its status. And so the first thing it'll return will be the treatment boundaries, which it just did. That's perfect timing. And so they'll be highlighted in white, and then in a moment they'll be highlighted in green. And so you're seeing some green highlighting up here, and that's because part of that project or treatment overlays the boundary down here. So you can kind of visually see where the treatments are going to be returned on the landscape. And then it's going to start to return these similarity indices as well. While that's running, you can still use the tool. And so you can go back to your site history and write notes. You can go back to your developing report and look at these tables and think about what these tables are telling you. Turn on different layers on the planning map. And if I scroll to the bottom of this, you can see the last cover tables to load are showing you cover data. And this top one here is showing you annual herbaceous cover as of July 2019. And then these lower tables here are showing you annual herbaceous, bare ground, big sagebrush, herbaceous, sagebrush, and shrub. And these ones are conditions circa 2015 to 2016. And what these tables are showing you are the percent of your project area that has a binned amount of cover. So if we look at this one right here, 43% of that project area has 0 to 10% annual herbaceous cover. And about 50% of the area has 10 to 30% annual herbaceous cover. So that's as of July 2019. So that's actually after our wildfire in this scenario, which is kind of interesting. This table down here is showing you, again, those conditions circa 2015, 2016. And you'll see differences between these two annual herbaceous estimates because they're two different types of modeling, and they do have a slightly different spatial scale. So it's not unusual to see different numbers here. And they have a different temporal endpoint, right? Oh, okay, so our results just finished. So if I go back to this step here, there's a checkbox that says automatically go to the results tab. So it automatically switched me over to the results of the query I ran. So within 20 miles of that project, it found 114 matching treatments. And so that's still too many for one person to go through and read all of the details. So we've included these filters to start narrowing down your choices even further. So I'm going to narrow these down to seedings, and that takes it down to 70 treatments. And then I'm further going to narrow it down by those treatments that have something listed in the results field. So the LTDL data have many, many fields, and some of the data are more complete than others. Sometimes the documentation for projects is kind of sparse, and we might not have effectiveness or results in the documents that we have collected. So I'm just going to subset it to those that we do, so we can see how these projects did. So that takes it all the way down to 12 treatments, which is a much more manageable number for me to start getting some information from. If I click this little plus arrow, it'll expand the information for that project. And we can start to see, okay, this was an aerial seeding. It was a wildfire rehabilitation in 2011, and we can see the results listed here. So we can see that they had some results, they had some success, and so maybe something I read in here is saying, hey, they had success, maybe I'll try doing something similar with the same species that they used. And so you can go through this list and read about some of these past treatments and figure out maybe what happened that worked, what didn't work, what species, and what rates are they using. And you can get some useful information. So I'm checking a few of these treatments as those to include in my report. And so if I just check a couple more, now if I go over to the report tab near the bottom, you can see that it's added those details directly to the report. Once I'm happy with what I have included in my report, I'm going to do a print preview, and this will take it to a different view that shows you kind of the structure of the PDF report that it's going to output. And this takes a few minutes to build, and so just be a little patient. But what it's doing is it's building a section for each one of those summary layers that you created that table for. And so each section will have the name of the layer, a brief description of that layer, the source of that layer, and then it'll show the table, a small map, and then it'll show the legend as well once it's returned. And so it's still building. We'll give it a few minutes here. And if I scroll down, it will show the notes that you added. So there's a section here, and if I would have typed anything, your notes are going to be directly included into the export along here. So it looks like our report is done building. Once it's done building, you can print it to a PDF, and you just hit print report. And this takes a few minutes. Again, every step has a lot of processing that it does in the background, but it'll start running the code to make this PDF. And when it's finished, it'll open a Save As dialog box where you just save it to your computer. And then you have this PDF report that's standardized and repeatable. And it shows all of those summary layers that you had selected, and you can append that as justification for a planning document requesting for funding, for example. I'm sure it's popping up. And while this is loading, I can show you guys. We have recently been able to create some tutorial videos. And so we have tutorial steps for each part of the exploration tool. So we have an introduction video and a short clip showing you how to do each step that I just showed you there. And so we have that as a resource, and we also have a detailed user guide directly in the exploration tool itself. And this page is still thinking. But that is kind of where the exploration tool ends. So if we want to go ahead and start looking at those questions, we can try that.
Cool. Yeah, I'll just read the ones that we have. And then I know, David, you answered some of them, but I'll just have you answer them verbally, vocally, if that's okay with you.
Yep.
All right, cool. So the first question we had from Anonymous was, are riparian treatments identified in the data set?
And the answer to that is yes, we capture any treatment that is recorded at the field office level. So if the field office records it, then we capture it, including riparian treatments.
Awesome. Next question from Nina Hemphill. Does this tool have the sources of the wildfire, or is this derived from INCI web or the source of the boundary? I ask because roads are a frequent source of fire and might lead to a treatment near roads.
And the answer to that question is we originally were capturing that information, and I was a little unsure if we continued to, but the answer that I got back from our data manager was yes, we are still recording human caused or lightning caused and so forth. as long as it's known. We don't ever provide information that's conjecture.
And then Emily Jensko had a comment that this would be a good tool to also push out to READ/Fs. I don't know what that is. David, do you know what that is? READ/Fs? Read?
So it's resource advisors and resource advisors for fire lines.
Ah, okay. So this would be good for the resource advisors on the fire lines to use before ES&R IDTs go on field tours. I'm guessing ID teams. I have a question, and I would really encourage anybody who is on to type in your questions if you have one while I'm asking. So this is a really awesome data set, and it looks like you all there's a lot you can do with it, and you have a lot going on in there. And I really liked the report settings that you had, the function that you had. One of my questions is what are your thoughts in terms of integrating this with AIM? I was looking at your map and it was looking a lot like our AIM data portal, and I'm just like, wow, the amount of information out there is pretty amazing, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of putting those together more.
It's a good question, and it's really up to BLM to guide what they want. So we just respond in terms of product development here as to the end user. So if there's features of the AIM data that would be useful, we can work on improving that aspect of the tool. For example, right now, Michelle's highlighting a BLM AIM terrestrial plot, and it shows project name and plot ID and established date. And so you could look that up. We're also thinking about displaying information about cover, for example, the actual data. But think when you do that, if you hover over that, that could be quite a long list. And so we need a little guidance on what is it that's most important to show about the actual measurements that were taken at that AIM plot. So some of it's just a back and forth of, we want this, okay, how can we present it in a way that's useful?
Yeah, and I really liked the that you could see the threatened and endangered species of the areas that you were looking at. I thought that was really cool, and I think these would be really amazing to like be able to provide the reports to field crews as well. I think going out and just being able to understand the vegetative community and the context of what happened. Let's see, we have another question from Anonymous. Can you buffer an area from miles to feet? Example for a 300-foot buffer area for a riparian area.
I will say that's a great question. Related to that, somebody asked us why we're doing things in miles and not kilometers. So yeah, we do our best to meet these various needs, but it wouldn't be hard to have to select the unit of measure that you want, and then it'll just convert it. So that's very doable, and it's already been requested. If you could go back for a second to the AIM plots, Michelle. So one thought I had when it comes to AIM, since this is an AIM working group, one thing we could potentially do is capture the points that fall within the wildfire boundary, and then give a little report about that. So you could say, there were 12 AIM plots that fell within the boundary that were established prior to the wildfire. Their cover, they were collected this many years before the wildfire, and their cover values are these. And then also talk about some AIM plots that are in the perimeter around the wildfire that are not in the wildfire, and summarize those. So that could be something that could be automated. It wouldn't be hard for us to do, but we just don't know if that's useful. So.
We have another question from Shannon Savage, who's the National AIM Team Remote Sensing Specialist. Shannon asks, what is the source data for the annual herbaceous or etc. Vegetation cover? You mentioned two different data sets. Is one the MRLC shrubland data, the 2006, let's see, is one the MRLC shrubland data, the 2016 source, and then what is the 2019 source?
I will let Michelle answer that question.
Sure. So on the About tab of the website here, and if you scroll down, we actually have a table of all of the sources of data that we use. And so the existing vegetation cover and type categorized data, that's Landfire. And then we have the USGS shrubland product, which is from the MLCD, I think that you were just referring to. And so you can click on these links and they will take you to their original data source location. And so, or the MRLC, sorry, I think I said that incorrectly. And then the July layer is from the Boydie data. And so you can get the source of all of our information. And then in the report for each section, so if I scroll down, sorry for the quick scrolling here. If I go to that section of the report, it will show you exactly where it's getting it. So each section has, the source listed here, which is going to be the same as what's listed in here. So you can find it a couple different ways. And we have the metadata separately, the service separately, and then the original source, as well as the publication date and the date of the data itself.
Awesome, thanks, Michelle. I have another question. I see one popped up, so I will ask this question before my own question. Can I import my Polygon layer? Oh, let me publish it. Thank you to the publisher. Can I import my Polygon layer to the land treatment exploration tool? I'm assuming you can.
Are you referring to a treatment area or like a broad scoping Polygon layer that shows some attribute? Because if it's your treatment area, of course, you can upload it as a zip shapefile. That's essentially what I did. As far as your own spatial layer, like if you had a range map that you created for a certain species and you wanted to overlay that in the exploration tool, that's not currently one of the capabilities, but we are going to add a way to add additional layers with a URL. So if it's a published service, you'll be able to add it, but not if it's just a random shapefile on your desktop at this time.
Awesome.
It looks like Anonymous said, yes, that would be useful. I presume that it refers to the AIM data points being available on the land treatment tool. So we will definitely work with you all to try to see what we can do with that.
I have one more question for David and Michelle. Michelle, I heard you mention treatment effectiveness was something that you can learn about through this data set. My question is, has there been any analysis of this large data set in terms of like treatment effectiveness in regards to different types of treatments or different types of ecological systems?
David, do you want to hit on that one? Oh, he's muted, I think.
Let's see.
I was muted. Why don't you go ahead, Michelle?
Sure. So in the LTDL, we do have a field right here called BLM reported success. And this field can be useful, but if you're just using the simple successful, not successful, you have to understand all of the caveats that come with that, because success has never been defined consistently. And so we have this field that you can kind of use to determine if things were successful if the BLM said something about it. And then we have this text qualifier of what was said about the treatment after it happened. And so this is kind of the gem of information we're hoping people can pull out important pieces. And as far as looking at it across the landscape, it gets a little tricky, like I said, because success has never been determined consistently across time, across people, across space. So I think that's something that the BLM is striving to accomplish with VMAP, but it's a little tricky with some of the legacy data.
Cool, thank you, Michelle. We have another question. Is the land treatment database pulling data in through the BLM VMAP database?
Do you have it?
That's a good question. Not seamlessly, not in real time. That is our goal, that as the data are published via VMAP, that they would migrate to the land treatment digital library and then up to the land treatment exploration tool. That will happen one day. At this moment, we're still pulling records directly from VMAP and from SharePoint. We're also in the process of what we're calling bridging the gap. So there is some field offices that we visited several years ago, and there's a gap in information since that time. And we're going to be traveling. We were in the middle of traveling when this pandemic hit, but when we get free to travel again and field offices open, we will be visiting all the field offices in the country again and doing one more sweep to get all of the either missing records or the records that were just missing in that gap since our last visit to make things current. And ideally then it would be seamless with VMAP moving forward. So just a little heads up, we are going to be having a crew traveling again, and another opportunity to contribute records.
Awesome. Let's see. Another anonymous question is, first they say, great presentation. This database is absolutely amazing with the amount of data that is available to analyze an area for NRs and other aspects. Can you talk a bit about the option to map locations of T&E species within a polygon? Some of this info is protected from the public and is also buffered.
So currently we have that IPAC tool, but we also pull in the Fish and Wildlife Critical Habitat. So that's a publicly available data set, and it might have those kind of buffering issues, but there's none in this area, but there is some critical habitat just due south of our treatment area. So that's one way we're including it, and then that IPAC tool. It is kind of a risky subject, and one way we could include that is if the BLM has an internal access only layer that's a feature service, and after we get the capability to add additional feature services, a BLM employee or any Department of the Interior employee can add that feature service URL that of their own, special layer that the public don't have access to. So there'll be, for instance, like a little input here that says add layer via URL, and you just paste it in there and it would add it to your map.
Michelle, did you want to touch on some of the future directions? You had a slide on that.
Sure, I made this PowerPoint in case the internet died. So as far as future directions go, and I put it on the wrong screen, so I'll keep it here. One of the next steps in our next round of updates is we're going to start incorporating the soil watt model, which predicts the soil moisture conditions into the future. some amount of time. And we're kind of have this idea that we'll have the short-term forecast tab in the exploration tool that'll show you what is the predicted soil moisture levels in the next few months. And then you can start thinking about how that has implications on your current treatment planning and such. We're also going to be including some drought indices. This expanding monitoring data that includes exploring things we've talked about in this call, further incorporating the AIM data to get things like species lists in the area and the cover values returned. And then we also want to further incorporate other land treatment databases. So we're a BLM only shop, but there are a lot of other lands out there being treated by the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, private landowners, state-owned lands. And we pull in some of those data layers to view, but we want to try and incorporate those better into the adaptive management swing of things. We also want to add in some graphics to show you the temperature and precipitation trends before and after legacy land treatments to give you some context about why some of those legacy treatments succeeded or didn't. Because as we all know, temperature and precipitation are large drivers of plant establishment. And then, of course, everyone would love to be able to save and return to your work. Right now, it's just by the browser window. So if I were to close that browser window, that data is lost. And so you have to go through the whole process to get your report, or you can leave the tab open, and you can leave it open overnight, and it keeps your data fine. So those are kind of some of the future directions that we're hoping to incorporate.
And just to reiterate, when you're in that planning phase, you can export the maps, you can export the report in PDF format, and then it's saved permanently.
Awesome. We had an anonymous question. Are you recording this webinar so it can be shared amongst BLM staff who could not attend today? And yes, this is being recorded. It is currently available on the Microsoft Stream service, so just go to the AIM SharePoint. Alita provided the link in the question response, and just scroll down and we have all of the videos from this series posted there. Nina Hemphill says, very cool. These are great additions. Thank you for the presentation to David and Michelle. We've gone through all the questions. And yeah, I don't know if we want to wait a second for more or if we want to just show you where we do keep.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and share this information, and we will give one last opportunity for questions after this is shared. Just as a reminder to everyone, these are being recorded and are available internally to BLM staff on our AIM SharePoint at the address listed below. And then upcoming webinars are listed both on that SharePoint and on the aim.landscapetoolbox.org website. And so for our external partners, you can watch the live event, and we hope to eventually make the recordings available to you as well. Did we get any last questions?
Let's see, I see one more of a suggestion. Would love to be able to incorporate GIS layers from Nevada Department of Wildlife. So some state stuff, huh?
Absolutely, and if there is data layers, as you're using the tool, if there are data layers that you think would be useful and useful to others, let us know, and we can discuss how to incorporate those. As Michelle mentioned, everything we display has to be published and available and have metadata, so we try to avoid, small GIS layers that are super specific and unpublished, but some of that may be incorporated later by user preference at some point.
Let's see. One more question. Someone says, could they get the link for the land treatment exploration tool again?
Michelle, you want to type that in? It's an interesting question, partly because we just went to a new URL, and there were two versions. There was a development version of the land treatment exploration tool, and then a public version. And we found people were using different links, and so we want to make sure it's consistent. So that link that she just displayed there, usgs.gov/LTET, is the current public version, and there may be a few features that we displayed today that you don't see there, but in the next couple of days they'll be current.
That's correct. So what I was actually showing you is our internal development URL, and we are pushing those updates to the public site this week. And so if you go to that site right now, it'll take you to the splash page. And from that splash page, it will take you to the tool, but it'll take you to the public tool, which will be updated with what I showed you soon.
Well, that looks to be the end of our questions.
Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope that you will be able to join us next week.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.